Hi, this is Kamera again. This is day number 322, Acts chapter 14 through 15. So we see that Paul and Barnabas are in Iconium, and they are preaching such a great message that a great number of Jews and Greeks became believers. However, there were some Jews who poisoned the mind of Gentiles. And yeah, isn't that something? So Paul and Barnabas, they continue preaching boldly. And this is the thing, the Lord allowed them to perform miraculous signs and wonders. So, yeah, the town was divided. And get this, a great mob was formed. And Paul and Barnabas, they heard that this mob wanted to stone them. So they fled. They fled that area and went to other areas to preach the good news. Lystia. So they stopped by Lystia and they're preaching. And so during the time that they're preaching, Paul, he calls out to this man who's crippled since birth, and he tells him to stand up. This man, Paul saw that he had faith. He stood up, he walked, and the people around were amazed. They were so amazed that they started calling Barnabas and Paul gods, Greek gods. They called Barnabas Zeus, and they called Paul Hermes. So Paul and they're preparing this sacrifice for them, like building this thing, and Paul and Barnabas like, no, 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 we're just ordinary men like you. And so they continued to preach Jesus. That was crazy. That was seriously crazy. But get this, some Jews from Antioch and Iconium, they arrived and they won the hearts of the people, or favor with the people. And the people, they stoned Paul and they dragged him out of the city, out of this town, and left him for dead. They thought he was dead. The believers, they came and they gathered around him, and eventually he got up. And the next day, him and Barnabas, they went to Derbe. So in Derbe, the news, they preached the news all over, and there were many believers, and they made many disciples. So they returned to Lycia and Iconium and a few other places that they had already been, where they had already been. They went back just to encourage the believers to continue believing. They also appointed elders when they went to back to these other cities. I love the follow up. I love the follow up. In Antioch, they gave a report to of all that God had done through them, and they stayed with the believers there of, it says here, some time, a long time. So get this though, this part right here is where there's some confusion. Believers were being taught that they had to be circumcised. That was a law passed down from Abraham on down. Isn't that something? So Paul and Barnabas, they didn't agree with that. They did not agree with that. And so the church sent them to Jerusalem to ask of the apostles and the elders there in Jerusalem. And so Peter, he stood and he addressed them. He addressed them and reminded them how God chose them to preach to the Gentiles. And he also said that, why challenge God by burdening these Gentiles? Instead, we should just tell them to abstain from, sexual immorality, eating any foods that were used as sacrifices to idols, or drinking blood. And there's a reason why they tell them to do that. So that's what we should basically tell them. And so, yeah. So Paul and Barnabas, yeah, this is the thing. There were letters sent from the apostles, the elders. They sent Judas and Silas back to Antioch to let them know of the final report. And they agreed with basically what Peter said: abstain from sexual immorality. Those are really the only thing they're saying they should abstain from, that, drinking blood, and eating from animals that were used for sacrificing idols, that type of thing. Offerings, for sacrificial offerings of idols. And that makes sense because, yeah, that just makes sense. And so get this. Paul and Barnabas, they agreed they would go back to places they had been to encourage the believers. And they both agreed that was a great plan. But Barnabas wanted to take John Mark back with them. Paul wasn't having that because he had deserted them earlier on. He had deserted them early on, and he was not about that. And so Barnabas did not agree with it, and they parted ways. Paul and Barnabas parted ways. Barnabas, he took John Mark with him, and Paul took Silas with him. Isn't that something? And they continued on their journeys to strengthen the church. Isn't that something? So, guys, it was a great read today. I absolutely love how through all of that negativity, Paul and Barnabas are doing their thing for the Lord. And you see where they people started preaching their own messages, adding on to the message of God. And that is why it's so important to know God's word. Read his word. Read his word. People will add on their own prejudices to saying what God say do and don't do. It be their own opinions, their own desire, their own traditions. Yes, you have to be circumcised. Really? Yeah. So it's important, guys. We have to read God's word, ask God for understanding. As you can see, they show in the beginning of the church, when the church first started, they try to add to God's words. So that's all I'm saying. I love that that was pointed out that it happens. It happens. So there you have it, guys. Day 322, Acts chapter 14 through 15. You have a God-filled blessed day.